so sorry about having to fix and re-upload this. I did not realize that the video had cut off so early on. I really didn't pay attention to comments as they came through on my phone, so I didn't see the comments saying that the video had cut off until after it had already been posted. And when I did upload it, it was like 5 o'clock in the morning. I was exhausted, and once I saw it had uploaded, I just kind of shut it down. And so I'm sorry that happened. So I'm going to redo the video completely from scratch. I'm not even going to reuse the footage that I put in from last time. But I'm very sorry. I will promise to pay more attention. I've just kind of been all over the place, and when I'm uploading a whole bunch of videos in one day, it kind of drags out since it takes so long for me to edit and then export it through iMovie, and especially because you can't edit another video while something is exporting on iMovie, so I end up spending like at least 2 hours waiting for iMovie before I can do another videos, and that's why it takes so long. That's why sometimes I get kind of flustered or make little mistakes when I'm uploading something really quickly. But anyway, I'm sorry. I'll pay more attention, and I will redo this and upload 2 other videos today, and I will make sure that I check to make sure there's no problems with them at all. I'm sorry, and please forgive me. Again, this video is dedicated to Renee because she's the one who came up with the tag, and I will do the captions once more. And thank you for watching. What was your first introduction to fairy tales? My first real introduction to fairy tales, besides the Disney movies, my first Disney movie was Aladdin, was the Reading Rainbow book, Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters. And it was about an African villager named Mufaro who had 2 daughters who were very beautiful, but one of them, Manaya, had a very bad temper and was very selfish. Although she wouldn't be selfish in front of her father, so he didn't really know that she was kind of a bitch. And Naija was always kind of considerate to both people and, the forces of nature. So it's kind of like a very Cinderella story. Manyara thinks that she's better than her sister, so she goes off on her own, thinking that she can go pretend into the king before her sister and that she'll be so beautiful that he'll just look at her, want to marry her, and it'll be the end of that. And then along the way they have to go through a series of tasks and lessons that are tests for them to see if they are worthy brides. And, Manyara fails because she doesn't have the kindness of heart, and Naija does, and she ends up becoming queen. And that was kind of my first really traditional fairy tale type story that I used to read and really get into. Do you have a favorite fairy tale characters, or several? My favorite fairy tale character overall is Scheherazade from 101 Nights. I really admire her bravery in this face of the situation that she's put against with the Sultan. She puts herself in the line of danger because she feels a personal responsibility to protect future women. And she understands that she could die from this situation, but she comes up with a plan. She tries to be very resilient. And she's just very noble to me. Even though her story is mainly the frame for the overall tale, she shows a great deal of inner strength in choosing to go into the situation because she's from a woman of high birth. I mean, she's the vizier's daughter, so she could get away. She doesn't need to be put in this situation, but she puts not only her life on the line, but also her sexuality, because she is going to be deflowered when she marries the Sultan, because he's only going to stick with virgins, have sex with them, and then kill them. So she puts her entire self on the line in order to protect the other women that could end up dying. Besides her, I would say Baba Yaga from Russian folklore, Gretel from Hansel and Gretel. She's one of the few people from Grimm's fairy tales who's actually killed the villain, so big ups to that. Snow Queen, the original Little Mermaid from Andersen's story, and Not See the Spider from Caribbean and African folklore. Do you immediately associate fairy tales with Disney and the Disney incarnations? Do you think this association is a good or bad thing? Yeah, I mean, it can't be helped that you associate a lot of these fairy tales with Disney. When you hear the Cinderella, you think of, that donut hole dress, the up bang, talking to mice about bullshit, birds and twinkle and stuff like that. Because Disney has ingrained itself so much into our childhood that we can't help but associate those stories with what we think the actual story should be like. However, I don't think it's intrinsically a bad thing, because Disney does have subtext to it. You can go into any fairy tale, Disney fairy tale, and still see social issues, issues to talk about, different ideas of structure and gender and blah blah. There's so much you can get out of Disney stories when you think about them and analyze them in an intellectual way, that they are not, just children fodder as they've been kind of pushed upon, because they are written by adults and they're written with an adult sensibility, even though they're directed towards children. The bad thing about this is that there's this mentality now that fairy tales are only for children, and that's not what fairy tales initially were. I mean, if you look at Perrualt, he didn't really write fairy tales directly for children. He wrote it for other people around him. He was kind of like having these kind of satires. And if you look at the morals and themes of those fairy tales, it's very clear who he's writing towards in those stories. And so many people now, when they make adaptations of fairy tales, they have this whole idea of like, we're going to be hardcore, we're going to go beyond all that Disney bullshit, we're going to be like real hardcore, super kawaii fairy tales and stuff. And it's not genuine, because it's just an artificial adding of darkness onto something that's already dark. There's a lot of issues going on with it. So it's not automatically a bad thing that Disney has become the main association when you talk about fairy tales. The problem is that so many people think that there's nothing to them, and that they shouldn't be held to any sort of like, intellectual meaning other than like, it's for children. Do you prefer lighter or darker fairy tale renditions? For a long time I really assumed that darker was better, but after watching Snow White and the Huntsman and a few other supposedly darker fairy tale renditions, what I realized is that while the darker ones tend to, get most of the acolytes because they are darker and people think that actually means that they're good, the lighter fairy tale renditions and adaptations that I have seen have actually been less disappointing, because they're not taking themselves too seriously and allow themselves to have fun, but the context and the subtext still carries over through the comedy because it's still playing with those same tropes. And I feel like a lot of times the lighter ones are more self-aware of some of the problems in fairy tales, and so they'll joke about them while still trying to like go the traditional route. Like just looking at Princess Bride, looking at Ever After, Ella Enchanted, all of those are lighter fairy tale renditions, but they still get the point. They still understand where they're coming from, and they still respect the genre of fairy tales. Whereas the darker ones kind of belittle the fact that fairy tales have, that kind of mystical, colorful element to them, and just think, oh yeah, we don't care about that fairy bullshit. We're just gonna be hardcore, and kill people and sword fights and Charlize Theron. And do you read fairy tale adaptations? If so, name some faves. Definitely one of my favorites is Blood, Glass Apple by Neil Gaiman. It's a really great fairy tale retelling of Snow White from the Queen's perspective, and it deals with like necrophilia, pedophilia, the issues that the Queen goes through, stuff with the prince. It's just a really well constructed adaptation that really gets the dark subsets of the character of Snow White. Angela Carr's The Bloody Chamber is definitely a must when it comes to fairy tale adaptations. I mean, if we're going to go with the Cinderella motif, if we're going to go with the Snow White motif again, the Snow Child is just a really excellent way of showing how the Snow White character is and what it kind of means for like young female sexuality. And her stories are just great. The way she deals with, different issues, like The Bloody Chamber itself, which is a kind of a retelling of Bluebeard, is such a dark, twisted story. Another one is this anthology that I'm currently reading is My Mother, She Killed Me, My Father, He Ate Me, which is based on the juniper tree. And it has a series of adaptations written by a whole bunch of different authors. And so far it's been really good because they're all kind of putting a modernized feel to it, or playing with the way the story already was originated and things like that. That's also really good. One I forgot to mention in the video before was actually this book called Just Ella, and it is basically a continuation of this. And this other one I forgot to mention before as well, but I feel like it's appropriate for this. The Sleeping Beauty trilogy by Anne Rice, the erotica trilogy. That adaptation is really, really. It's more an adaptation of The Sun, the Moon, and Talia than actual Sleeping Beauty, but it also is just a dark story, and it's an erotica, but it's like a fun read, and it goes there. Like so much erotica, it's just very like it's vanilla, but tries to be like, oh no, she's got like things on her nipples, oh my god, it's like whatever, stop. But this one, it goes to that point, goes to those. It's a fun, dark but porn thing that I like. In terms of fairy tales on film, what are some of your faves? definitely Freeway. Like, if you haven't checked out Freeway, it is a must. How they do the Red Riding Hood story while doing stuff about like class and everything is just really well done, and all the like wolf metaphors that will happen in the movie are just really on point. Ever After, which is the Drew Barrymore Cinderella kind of adaptation, great movie, a great way of handling the Cinderella story. You actually care about Cinderella and her prince, definitely great. The 1998 Cinderella story with Rodgers and Hammerstein, like it's not that dynamic and it doesn't really like turn a lot of stuff on its head, but it's a fun, entertaining movie that I can't help but like enjoy it so much whenever it comes on. Like, I watch it and I'm just kind of like, yes, I'm so happy this is on. And like, I bought the DVD and I rewatched it. It's a fun, engaging story about something that is so benign in itself. Like, everyone knows a Cinderella story, but you add music to it, all of a sudden it just becomes so much more enjoyable. What novels and films with a fairy tale feel do you enjoy? These are not directly canon tales. Example, A Tale from Grimm's, Perrault, from Andersen, etc. Number one is definitely The Princess Bride. The Princess Bride is such a great satire of fairy tales because it understands what fairy tales talk about and doesn't try to like modernize it and upgrade it to make it more acceptable for a modern audience. Because a lot of people, when they try to do fairy tale retellings, we have to deal with like the Cinderellas or the Snow Whites and etc. They're just kind of like, oh no, what really matters is that you're beautiful on the inside. But then that's a bullshit thing, because it's not about being beautiful unless you're beautiful both inside and out. If you're ugly, you will become beautiful. There's a reason why the ugly duckling doesn't get told, yeah, you're ugly, but you have a really great personality. And if people just saw you for that, they would love you anyway. It's like, no, she's going to become a beautiful swan because then she'll get swan ass. The Princess Bride not only understands that, but it plays with that idea. For example, the character of Buttercup, who is the Princess Bride, when the story begins, she is not the most beautiful woman in the world. There have been others. She's like 20th. And the narration tells that there have been other most beautiful women in the world, and that the three that are mentioned beforehand, all met very sad ends because they either got too fat and lost their beauty. One of them tried really hard to keep their beauty and ended up, breaking out in wrinkles and, stress lines because she was trying so hard to maintain her beauty. And with Buttercup, when she first appears, she's like 20th on the most beautiful list. She's not really interested in like making herself more beautiful. She's got her love interest. She's got a family that loves her for the most part, and she's good. She has her horror. She does her thing, and she's cool. When Wesley leaves, she decides that she wants to become more beautiful so that she can maintain her desirability for him. And so she goes from being 20th to 15th, and so on and so forth. And when she actually becomes the most beautiful woman in the world, that's when everything goes bad for her. Wesley dies, and Prince Humperdinck decides that he wants to take her to be his bride so that, he can have the bride that everyone envies. So without having to hammer down, beauty and insight is what matters and blah, blah, it states that while beauty is something that we see as important, it is not always something that gives us a lot of happiness in life, because Buttercup's beauty does not bring her happiness. Her being the most beautiful woman in the world does not make her a happier person. It adds more stress to her life. If you haven't seen The Princess Bride or read the book, I feel like it's a necessity. It is just a really great satire of the genre, and it understands where it's coming from, and it plays with so many different tropes and things that it's totally enjoyable, and I think that everyone should take it out. Pan's Labyrinth is another movie I would consider kind of a fairy tale because first of all, there's so many Alice in Wonderland allusions to it. I mean, that one dress that Ophelia wears that's green with the little apron and the bow. I mean, that's so Alice in Wonderland. The way she has to deal with the 3 tasks and everything like that, everything about it, and the changeling aspects of it, it just is a really fantastical story. And it does have fairies in it, and it has like fairy tale ideas and aspects in it. Into the Woods by Sondheim is another one that I think is just brilliant. I mean, the first act of the play is all these different fairy tales. I think it's Cinderella, Jack and the Beanstalk, Little Red Riding Hood, Baker and His Wife, and Rapunzel. I think those are the main 5 that begin in the story, and they all set out into the woods to go, get their wishes, find out what they want in life, and really, what the whole thing about happily ever after is they get the thing that makes them happy, the thing that they think will lead them to whatever everlasting bliss that we say that they have in happily ever after. But however, in Act 2, when they have all those things, it kind of, it reconstructs it, it deconstructs it, because it all falls apart. Everything I thought would make them happy, would make them, live longer, all kinds of stuff, it falls apart. It is no longer just this kind of like, it plays with the idea of, we wish for things, and sometimes what we wish for isn't really what's best for us, because we just want it, and we see with kind of blinders of, if I get this, then I'll be happy. But Into the Woods really understands the idea that happiness is not always based on getting what you want. And I feel like the first act is while it's fun and everything, the second act really is what makes this adaptation, this fairy tale story, so much better than so many others that try to do the exact same thing but try to do it with like swords and shit. A Little Princess is definitely something I would consider a fairy tale story. It's a riches to rags to riches story. The character Sarah Crew, how it deals with the idea of what it means to be a princess, and how it's about character, not so much about money, which I think is a much better message than beauty and whatever, because character does make you a better person, and character does separate you from what other people do. You can be more like, you can be a beautiful person on the inside and have that strength of character, and that is important, but it's not going to always, at the end of the day, feed you. So you need that extra help and stuff like that, and I think the story understands that. The Secret Garden is another one that definitely has a lot of fantastical elements with the garden, how Mary is transformed by the garden, and that kind of thing. In the Company of Wolves, definite. I mean, it's a little bit Little Red Riding Hood, but it's also partly, it's a combination of different fairy tales by Angela Carter. I think all of them are in the Bloody Chamber anthology, and it's just a really innovative and really interesting way of dealing with werewolves and werewolf fiction. And I really love that book. I have to buy it again because it's really good at really handling the different folklores about werewolves, if their eyebrows meet in the middle, how they wear another person's skin, and how their skin can peel off, and how they're seducers and things like that. All that stuff is just really interesting, and the overarching theme of puberty and adolescence and those kind of things. In terms of anime, I would say that Pre-Tier, because Pre-Tier is technically a Snow White adaptation, is another one that I think is really enjoyable. It turns the Snow White character into a magical girl character, and the Seven Dwarfs are knights that she uses to, like, she can take their power into herself. Yeah, I know. It's very, like, that's a metaphor for sex thing. And she takes their power into herself, and she becomes a more powerful knight and things like that. Spirited Away, I would definitely say, of all of Miyazaki movies, is probably the most fairy tale-ish of them all. It's very similar to some aspects of Pan's Labyrinth. Finally, in a kind of weird horror way, I would say Carrie. Carrie is definitely, a lot of people have described it as Cinderella told by Stephen King, and I definitely can see aspects of that in this story. It's not so much, I wouldn't say that much that it's more has a fairy tale feel, but it does have a lot of fairy tale elements. You think that once Carrie goes to the ball and everything, she's got her prince, everything's gonna work out fine, and then pig's blood and everything goes to shit. So I think it does have kind of a little bit of that fairy tale element. You can definitely see issues of Cinderella, the evil mother, the society that keeps her down and stuff. It definitely has those elements to it. What do you think accounts for the enduring appeal of fairy tales? I think the enduring appeal of fairy tales is based on the fact that when we're kids, we can read them, and they can be basically like our self-insert fan fiction. They are stories that we read that don't really have really defined leads, so we can insert ourselves into them and go on these adventures with, Jack and the Little Mermaid and blah blah. And when we're young, we can just have that. And as we get older, when we reread them and we re-familiarize ourselves with these fairy tales, we see different things in them. They grow as we grow in terms of understanding the depth of them, what they're talking about in terms of themes and metaphors and things like that. So I feel like the enduring reason and appeal of it is that it can benefit us at any age. Is there a character or a tale that impacted you the most? Two fairy tales, The Princess and the Frog. Not the way that Disney did it. It was the one where there's a princess and she has a golden ball and she's like throwing it up in the air and catching it, throwing it up in the air, catching it, and then she throws it up in the air and it falls into the pond, and the frog's like, I'll get it for you if you do these 3 things for me. If you let me sleep in your bed, come to your house and eat on your table. And she's like, yeah, just get my ball, please, I need you. And then he goes against the wall. She's like, yay, bye, bitch. And then she goes back, and the frog follows her and whatever. And then, you know, he does the things. And then in the end, she kills the frog by chucking it into the wall like a crazy person. And then she's like, oh, I feel so bad now that I killed it. And then the frog comes back to life and becomes a prince. This was the first time in a fairy tale, because I've read this when I was a kid. And when I was a little bit older, when I was about 8 or 9, it actually clicked to me like, holy crap, she killed the frog. And then after that had clicked with me, the other thing I realized was just like, wow, what the story was telling me about people and what they were capable of doing and about hating based on appearances. It was the first time like I actually got like, oh, it's trying to teach you about beauty on the inside. The second one is The Little Mermaid, Anderson's version. But actually, I could say that both versions impacted me in much different ways, but just to make this short, I'm just going to focus on the Anderson one. It was important to me because it was the first fairy tale that really, I felt, taught me a lesson that was so different from what so many other fairy tales teach us, including Princess and the Frog and other stories like Beauty and the Beast and whatever, where you have that character who sacrifices so much for love, and in the end, they gain that love and all that kind of stuff, and we're just like, yay, it's great, you work so hard, you do all this stuff, and now they love you for real, for real. But Little Mermaid basically was saying to me and to other people, just because you love someone and you love them deeply and strongly and genuinely, because her love for the prince, while he's also part of her way to get a soul, she did love him. Despite all of that, he didn't love her back. And just because you love someone that much doesn't mean that they'll love you back. And that is such an important lesson to learn. And so many fairy tales that give us such gratuitous, ideas of what love and relationships are. It was the first one I actually saw something about genuine heartbreak that was something that wasn't just going to get over with. Like, there was no coming back from that. The story was over. There was no sequel where she suddenly can get them back, and there's no way she can get them back. I mean, she's dead now. 11, if you could rewrite or revision any fairy tale, what would it be and what would you do change? Alright, one of the big things I've always wanted to do with Snow White, and it's another thing I'm going to do with it later on and something I'm actually working on now, but one of the main ideas I always want to do with Snow White is to have the idea of her dealing with the psychological effects of her stepmother's actions. I mean, this is the only woman she's ever really had in her life that we know of. And I'm sure she gets like maid service, but it's like everyone's like dad, dead. Then it's like dwarves, men, and then everything hunter, men. Beyond that, the stepmother's the only woman that we ever see interact with Snow White. And so I wonder how she would ever trust other females again, because she has no positive female role model. And she's already been told that women will backstab and kill you because you're prettier than them. How will this affect her relationship with any other woman, like women at court? Her own daughters. I mean, could she end up becoming her own evil stepmother or evil mother to her own children, her own daughters? And I think that's something that's really interesting that I would love to explore with that character at a later date. And finally, your fairy tale weapon of choice, between a poison apple, the power of a name, an evil bargain, or preying on a specific human weakness/emotion. Preying on a specific weakness/emotion, because those are really reliable and you can usually tell when people are going to fall for certain things. Like, that's always, like, someone's tragic flaw is always just pick at it because it'll use them to fuck themselves over. Because poison apple, if the apple falls out of the lips, it'll be fucked up. Power of a name, bitch will figure that out and you end up at Rumpelstiltskin all split in half. Evil bargain, no. Never trust a Faustian contract. That shit will screw you over. So, preying on human weakness and emotion. It's the way to go.